Now, a very disturbing new report that I read from the Institute of Public Affairs has revealed Australia's move to net zero emissions could more than double the cost of electricity for Tasmanian families. I wanted to find out more, so joining me now is the Director of Research at the Institute of Public Affairs, a very well-credentialed gentleman who holds an honours qualification in economics, a degree in international studies from the University of Adelaide, and pretty much so much more. It's Daniel Wild. Daniel, good morning to you.
Good morning. Lovely to be with you.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. This is quite a damning report, isn't it? I mean, when people are talking, renewables till it comes out of your left, you know what, and all of a sudden we're finding that we're in a dire straits, particularly. I mean, I thought that when I read that report, which I read all of it, and there's a quote from you, the recent exponential rise in household power bills, along with the blackouts, are not an accident. It's caused by deliberate net zero policy choices made by low-voltage politicians on both sides of politics, cheered on by corporate and media elites. Now, that is one strong comment.
It is, and I think it reflects the very significant challenges that we face, and it's mostly low-voltage politicians from the mainland that are imposing this cost on Tasmanian families and businesses under the name of net zero emissions. As you mentioned, what our research found is under the policy of net zero, it'll be Tasmanian families and businesses that'll be the hardest hit in the nation in terms of higher electricity bills, with prices for families to more than double by the year 2030, going from around $2,000 a year to a whopping $4,500 a year for your annual electricity bill. Businesses in Tasmania face a more than quadrupling to their annual electricity bills. And the key point is that under the policy of net zero emissions, we've got the closure of 6 coal-fired power stations on the mainland by the year 2030. That is going to take a further 20% off our already struggling national energy grid. Now, as you know, when the mainland power goes down, the hydro from Tassie gets sucked out, and that's great for hydro in terms of their bottom line. But what it means is that Tasmanians are stuck with the bill because of short-sighted decisions taken by politicians on both sides of the aisle.
Which is what you'll never hear them absolutely mentioning. That's why it's quite astounding when all we hear is we're 100% renewable in Tasmania. Our prices will be a lot lower. We've got battery of the nation. It's only going to cost $3.8 billion so far. So it's interesting when you get this kind of research, people would have to say, oh, that Daniel bloke, he's being paid by the coal-fired companies.
Well, our research speaks for itself. I mean, if you look at, you take coal off the market, which provides, reliable, affordable power, you can't get that from solar and wind, which is what mainland politicians are pushing onto the grid. You can get it from hydro, which is why Tasmania has been so successful, but you can't get it from wind or solar, which are experimental technologies on a mass scale. No advanced industrial nation can power its economy or society on wind and solar at a baseload level. And that's why we're seeing internationally leading nations like the UK and Germany pulling back on net zero and pulling back on renewables. Don't forget, Boris Johnson recently said that the UK needed to pause its commitment to net zero in order to shore up its power supplies. We've got Germany, who has a member of the Greens party as its economic minister, saying that they're going to reboot their coal-fired power stations because renewables can't get the job done. So what we're seeing under the policy of net zero is reliable, affordable power getting taken off the grid, solar and wind getting pushed on, but you can't get base load from wind and solar, and that's why we're seeing these skyrocketing prices for families and businesses in Tasmania.
And what is that's where if people will find this, hang on, my jaw's going to drop, because Tasmania is actually at the top of the list when you said facing the prospect of 125% increase in retail electricity bills, when you've got Queensland 110%, New South Wales 100%, Victorian families 95%, South Australian families 90%, and here we are, Mr. and Mrs. Renewable, 125%.
That's exactly right. And again, it gets to the key point that we've gone way too fast in promoting solar and wind power.
Too soon.
Too soon, too much. Look, renewables can play a role in topping up the grid, but you can't run an aluminium smelter with wind and with solar, and you can't power an advanced economy with wind and solar. You need baseload power. And what we need from both sides of politics is some leadership here. We've got still Anthony Albanese promoting more renewables, but renewables are more expensive than coal in a like-for-like basis. And I'm deeply concerned about what's going to happen. We're just at the start of winter. Don't forget, on the very first day of winter, the Australian Energy Market Operator, which is the chief government body in charge of the energy grid, said we're going to have to ration our energy supplies. Families across Australia have been told to turn off their heaters, not to run their dishwasher during the day. We've had major manufacturing plants being told to shut down their operations so the grid can stabilise. And this is just the beginning of Australia's future under the policy of net zero.
It's insane. It really is when you read this, because I have actually touched on that, the fact that have we been way too early in shutting down coal-fired power plants as such. But this, as I was reading today, the analysis, and I'll quote, does not factor in savings from the increasing penetration of renewable energy. And Federal Energy Minister Chris Bowen has maintained introducing more renewables into the system will reduce power prices. Now, that's quite correct, but that's not going to happen for how long?
Well, look, I don't share the view of Chris Bowen, because as renewables have gone up as a share of our total generation across the economy and our national grid, prices have gone up. Ever since we started promoting renewables way back in the year 2000 with the renewable energy target, prices have gone up and up and up. The only time they've come down, and you can look at the data, the only time they've come down is when Tony Abbott repealed the carbon tax, and we saw a massive drop in electricity prices. Nowhere in the developed world has more wind and more solar gotten prices down. Look at Germany again. I return to this example. One of the chief advocates of green energy has among the highest prices in Europe. Their energy sovereignty has been outsourced, where they were getting about 60% of their gas supplies from Russia. And as I say, they are now rebooting their coal. The UK is pulling back from net zero. So Australia is behind the curve, where nations around the world are realising that renewables, wind and solar, cannot get the job done. You can get baseload from coal, you can get it from nuclear, and you can get it from hydros, but you cannot get it from wind and solar.
Talking with Daniel Wild, the Director of Research at the Institute of Public Affairs. I know in April, I was reading in the introduction to the document that I read, in April, the Institute of Public Affairs published a landmark study called The Economic and Employment Consequences of Net Zero Emissions by 2050. Now, and I'll go on to quote this paragraph, which identifies that to reach net zero emissions by 2050, at a minimum, all 89 coal, gas and oil projects currently in the construction pipeline must be cancelled. It was estimated that this could come at a cost of approximately $274 billion in lost economic output over the next decade, and prevent the creation of approximately 478,000 jobs, the majority of which would be in regional Australia. Now, that is a shocking paragraph.
And unfortunately, it's the case. I mean, It's unavoidable that if you want to cut emissions, you can't add emissions. It's as simple as that. If you want to get to net zero, as politicians on both sides have told us we must do, you can't have projects like oil, coal and gas coming onto the market because they're high in emissions. And as you say, that is going to cancel about $274 billion worth of projects. Now, the other troubling facet to this is that it's undermining our own energy sovereignty. You know, this is what the Russian invasion of Ukraine has demonstrated to the rest of the Western world. You must have your own energy supplies, because if you don't have your own energy supplies, you can't have a sovereign manufacturing capability, which means you're less able to defend yourself should you need to do so. Now, as you know, Australia is in a very uncertain part of the world, in the Asia-Pacific region. We've got increasingly bellicose behaviour from China. It's more important than ever that we're using our own resources. You know, we're blessed as a nation to have natural resources, coal, gas and oil. We should be using it. Instead, we send about 70 or 80% of our coal overseas. Now, the thing that's never explained is, why does it matter from an environmental perspective if the coal is used here or if it's used in China? The outcome in terms of the emissions is exactly the same, but what happens is our jobs are exported, we lose our energy sovereignty, and as we're seeing now, our prices are skyrocketing.
So realistically, it all just boils down to a fantastic statement for a politician to use to get in. But everything that we're looking at realistically is 3-year based, which is just a term based, and then we'll change and we'll change again, which is obviously going to be devastating. And I look at Tasmania. I can't believe that we're so heavily impacted, as in why, when we're so renewable as such. Then you've got we're going to be sending power off we do that with Basslink. We've got the power battery of the nation with Marinus. But why are we going to be copying it as the highest dealt with, 125% in Tasmania? Is it because we didn't de-link when we were supposed to in 2018 when the politicians said, we'll de-link from the national grid?
Well, that could certainly be a big part of it. The reason why Tasmanians are going to, as you say, cop it the hardest is because of the short-sighted politicians taken by mainlander politicians, particularly in Victoria and New South Wales, because when the energy supply on the mainland starts to decrease, the mainland then sucks the hydro out of Tasmania. That is the key reason why they're getting hit. Of course, as you know, Tasmania also has very long and cold winters, so Tasmanians need to use their heaters more than those on the mainland. So what we're seeing is really short-sighted policies. Look, it's not the political class that's incurring the cost. It's not big business bureaucrats. It's not your big banks that are incurring the cost. They're going to be fine. It's mainstream Australians living in the regions, living in Tasmania, the forgotten Australians that are incurring the costs in terms of their families, in terms of their businesses, in terms of their jobs, because of policies taken under net zero, which, as I say, will make no discernible benefit or no discernible difference to the global climate.
Would coming off seeing as Tasmania, and I keep saying it's 100% renewable because we get it rammed in our faces all the time, should we be disconnecting from the national grid to keep our prices down? Is that what needs to happen so that we can we've got great hydro reserves, we're at 33%, so we're doing okay there. There is some wind out there. So if they are, we're supposed to be heading for 200% renewable. Why can't we then just say, righto, we don't need that grid, and then they can't take the power away?
Well, that's the debate we need to have. We need to have the debate about these big visionary ideas. It was, because of the vision of early Tasmanian leaders that you develop hydro, and that's what's given Tasmania this solid base of baseload power. And we need to be having these debates about the relationship between Tasmania and the mainland in terms of energy. But also more broadly, we need to have a debate about the future of our nation. We need to have a debate about the policy of net zero. Both sides have signed up to it. We have not had a legitimate debate. In the 2022 election, the climate policy of Labor and the Coalition was the same in terms of the 2050 commitment. I know Labor has a different policy for 2030, but both sides, this is really important, both sides want to get to the same place by the year 2050. The differences are only of a degree of how they are going to get there. Australia is lacking the leadership and vision that we used to have in this country, but we no longer have, because the entire political class, and as I say, the media elite, the big banks, the corporates, they make a stack of money. The billions and billions that are put behind renewables, that is lining the back pockets of those who are already well off, but it's working class mums and dads in the regions trying to pay off the mortgage, trying to pay the school fees for the kids. We've got rising interest rates, rising inflation, rising grocery bills, and now they're being hit yet again with a doubling of electricity bills by the year 2030. And
when you say, that's an awful lot, isn't it? Those new coal, gas and oil projects, cancelling that, if they do that, and it's just going to get so much worse. And I'll read on again, which I thought was interesting. In Australia, the average disposable household income in the 2019-20 financial year was $1,124 per week, or $58,448 per annum, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. An annual bill of $3,248 or a quarterly bill of $812 will make up 5.6% of the average household disposable income, which is up from around 2.7% today. This is where I don't think no one ever hears of these stories, Daniel, do they? The reality is, why are you turning it off? We can't afford to.
You're exactly right, and you put your finger on something very important, which is that in 21st century Australia, in the year 2022, there are Australian families, low-income families, that are now having to choose between turning the heater on and feeding their family. That is what it has come to. It's low-income Australians that will incur the cost of this because they are the least able to afford the increases to electricity prices. And as I say, it's not the inner-city wealthy elite. They're going to be fine. They're going to be taken care of. It's those on low income, those living in the suburbs and regions, those who are already incurring escalating costs to the cost of living, that are going to incur the biggest cost of the policy that is being pushed, as I say, by the corporate and media elites, by the inner city. These teal candidates, they're going to be fine, but it's working class Australians that are footing the bill.
Spot on. And when I read also the sum of the expected change in wholesale price amounts to around 370% increase in Tasmania's average wholesale price for the relevant period. I mean, as we said at the start, Tasmanian households face that prospect of, 125% increase in retail electricity bills from, say 2,000 around 4,500 per annum. There's so many cannot possibly afford that.
No, they can't, and it's coming to a crunch time. And you mentioned the important point about bills for businesses. We've already had the Australian Energy Market Operator telling aluminium smelters, the one in Hunter Valley and the one in Victoria, to curtail their operations because the energy grid cannot handle it. Now, what does that mean? It means that Australia cannot guarantee the power supply for us to have industry and manufacturing. That is simply astonishing that is happening now in the year 2022. And this is not an accident, right? This is the key point. This doesn't, you don't just wake up one day. It's not like we've lost our coal supplies. We've got 2,000 years of coal in the ground. Yeah. It's because of deliberate decisions by politicians not to utilise our natural resources, but they're also happy for those same resources to be sent overseas for the benefit of other nations. So why, if our coal is good enough for other nations, why can't we use it? Why can't we have reliable, affordable baseload power if we're going to send that same power supply to other nations who, like I say, are going to burn the coal and use it? So in terms of the environmental impact, there's no difference. Whether the coal is used here, whether it's used in China, whether it's used in Indonesia, the impact's the same, but the cost to Australia in terms of jobs and prices is significant and immediate.
And we'll all get the argument. You'll get the argument from those that will say, look, it's the cost to our planet, and we'll understand that. But I also tend to think, let's go back to the people in Tasmania who cannot afford to just keep the heater on. I mean, to me, it's more the cost. They need to keep the heater on. Really. I mean, we don't want to see so many people. This is why I find this quite ridiculous. And the argument has to come back. Surely there needs to be a debate on those smaller nuclear power modules. I mean, that they say, it's too expensive, can't do it, can't do the rest of it. We just might have to.
Well, that's right. It's a really important point. And people said, back decades ago that Tasmania can't have hydro, but it was built. It's because of the vision of leaders at the time. We absolutely should be having a debate about nuclear. We had a poll out recently showing that Australians back the technology. About 53% of Australians said that Australia should be building nuclear plants in order to get reliable and affordable baseload power. Now, what's so interesting is support for nuclear was widespread across the political spectrum. About 70% of Liberal voters backed it, over 50% of Labor, and astonishingly, over 40% of Greens voters.
That is astonishing.
That is astonishing because historically they have been completely opposed to nuclear power, but it was over 40% supported it, which was more than double those who opposed it. So you're absolutely right. We need to be having a debate about Australia's energy future. That includes the prospect of nuclear, because at the moment there's two sources of power that can give us the reliable, affordable baseload supply we need. It's coal or it's nuclear. Net zero means there's no coal, and the ban on nuclear means there's no nuclear.
Yeah, you're spot on, and that's exactly that. That we're thinking that realistically, politicians just want the vote because saying coal's not sexy. You can't vote for coal. No one wants that. And then if we would have probably had more hydro had not the Greens butted in down here sometime many years ago, as you probably are aware. But the reality is now people are thinking, well, we need more of this. This is a difficult phase we're in. I mean, you can have an argument: do we save the planet, or do we save the people that are struggling to put the heater on, that are really doing terribly with the cost of living? And this is just frightening for those people listening to this.
It is, and I'm deeply worried about what this will mean for struggling Tasmanian families and small businesses. I think the point about saving the planet is an important one, because it's important to look at, well, what is Australia actually getting out of this in terms of environmental outcomes? And what we know is it's very little. Australia contributes less than 2% to total global emissions. China is about 30%. Here's a really important fact, which is that every 16 days, China emits more carbon in 1 year than Australia does in 16 days. So if we're talking about cutting emissions, it's got to be looking at China and other big emitters. What Australia does makes no noticeable difference. So what we're doing is losing our strategic economic advantage against competitor nations. There's no discernible environmental benefit, but we're undermining our economic capacity, undermining our energy sovereignty. And as you say, the cost, I mean, who is incurring the costs of this? It's already struggling families and businesses in Tasmania. The highest price hikes, 125% increase in retail electricity bills, a close to 400% increase to business bills. This is going to cripple Tasmania.
Yeah, you're not wrong, and I'm glad you've brought it to light. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Daniel Wild, Director of Research at the Institute of Public Affairs, and I do trust that we can have many more conversations.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And it really is great to talk to you, Daniel Wild, Director of Research at the Institute of Public Affairs, where you can actually Google that and find out more information yourself. Quite frightening research, but you need to know.